Salve omnes, welcome to Language Group. My name is Ralston and we'll be learning a bit of Latin today. Today we're mainly going to be focusing on just some basic grammar terms, which we'll need later on when I explain some more advanced stuff. So today what we'll be focusing on particularly is we're going to be talking about person, number, tense, mood, voice, case, gender, participles, degree, declension, and conjugations. So, to preface the video, when I'm talking about nouns, when I say the word nouns, what I'm mainly talking about is not only nouns, but also pronouns, adjectives, participles, and so on, because they have very similar characteristics in Latin. While when I talk about verbs, I'm talking about verbs and sometimes also participles, depending on what it is. But I'll go into more detail on that later. So let's start off first with declensions and conjugations. So what is a declension and conjugation? Well, they're both categories. Simplest way to put it is that declensions are the names of the groups that we associate with nouns. So declensions are groups of nouns, while conjugations are groups of verbs. Simple enough. Let's talk about verbs. So all verbs have what's called person, number, tense, mood, and voice in Latin. So starting off with person, there are three persons, first, second, or third. And person explains the question, who is doing the action, or from what perspective is the action happening. Whether it's I am doing the action, you, or he, she, it, or they, or some other group. Person explains who is doing the action. So there are three persons, like I explained before, and it describes the perspective from which the action is happening. Now, the second thing is number. So this answers the question, how many people are doing the action? Is it just one person, or is it more than one person? Simple enough. Latin only has two numbers, which is singular or plural. So singular, simple enough, one person; plural, two or more people. Next, you have tense. Tense answers the question, when is the action happening? So in English, we have three tenses. You have present tense, which happens now. You have the future tense, which happens in the future, hasn't happened yet. And then you have the past tense, which is something that's happened in the past. It also might, some people might include what I would call the past progressive, which is an action that happened in the past, but you're describing it as it was still happening at that particular point in time. But we'll get into that a little bit later. In Latin, there are six tenses. So you have the present tense, again, happening now; future, in the future, hasn't happened yet. And then you have four past tenses. You have the perfect tense, which is what we'd call the past in English. You have the imperfect tense, which is what I'd call the past progressive. And then you have the pluperfect tense and the future perfect tense, which gets into a little bit more detail, and I'll talk about that later. So tense answers when does the action happen. Next you have mood. So mood answers the question, what's going on, or how's this being said? So mood answers, is the sentence, is this a statement, is it a question, is it an order, is it a wish, any of those. So that's what mood answers. Last you have voice, which answers, is this active or passive? In other words, is the subject doing the action, or is the action being done to the subject? So let's take the sentence, for example, the boy hits the ball. Well, the boy is active because he is doing the action of hitting the ball. But if you flip the sentence a little bit and say the ball is hit by the boy, well, the ball is now the subject of your sentence, and it is passive because it is being hit. It is receiving the action of the hitting. So, enough with verbs, let's move on to nouns. So, nouns have case, number, and gender. First with case. So, because Latin is an inflected language, the forms of the nouns change based on what it's doing in the sentence. In Latin, there are 5 main cases, which is the nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, and ablative. Now, there are a couple more for you classicists, but I'm going to get into those a little bit later, because some of them can be a little bit more complicated. But basically, 5 main cases that you need to worry about. So, next you have number. Again, very simple. It just describes is one person doing the action, or are 2 or more people doing the action. And then you have gender, which is something that for you native English speakers is not something you're very used to. Gender in Latin is you have either the masculine, feminine, or neuter genders, and for the most part they're pretty arbitrary. They're just a way of making the language more specific, so that basically you get to have a little bit more fun with the language and be a little bit more creative because of this aspect. One thing I also wanted to add is a little tidbit about word order. So English has a subject, verb, object, word order. In other words, in order for a sentence to make sense in English, I have to say, I am doing the action. While in Latin, the typical word order is subject, object, verb. So the verb typically comes at the end. However, you'll often see in more advanced Latin, this isn't necessarily the case because of the inflection. It allows you to play around with the sentence order a little bit. Next, I want to talk a little bit about participles. So, participles are basically verbal nouns or adjectives, and they, in addition to having somewhat a tense, they also take on things like number, gender, and case, as other nouns do. And so in English, the participle that we're most familiar with is probably gerunds. And to give you some examples of this, both the sentences "the learned individual" and "the running boy" include participles in them. Next, let's talk about degree. I'm talking about the degree of comparison of a particular adjective. And so, when I talk about degree, it's kind of like talking about the level of which you're describing it. Simple example, it's the difference between, let's say, the beautiful girl. The girl is more beautiful than the other girl in her class, and that girl is very beautiful, or she is the most beautiful girl. So that's the degree between positive, comparative, and superlative. So that's a basic introduction. 2 things I also forgot to mention is as far as declensions goes, there are 5 different declensions of nouns. As far as verbs go, there are also 5, really there are 4 different conjugations, but there's a subset of one of the conjugations, which totals to 5. So I'm just going to say 5 conjugations in all. That's really it for today. So if you like the video, make sure to hit like or subscribe to the channel. I'll be making more of these as time goes on. So until next time, wale kayo, miss.